The Intergalactic First Contact Protocol Division occupied 17 moons, employed 2.3 million beings across 47 different species, and had successfully managed peaceful first contact with civilizations spanning 3 galactic arms. Their success rate was an impressive 97.4%, which would have been higher if you didn't count the incident with the crystalline hive minds of Andromeda Sector 12. But everyone agreed that particular disaster was more of a learning experience than an actual failure. What the IFCPD had never encountered, however, was a species quite like the inhabitants of the third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in what the locals charmingly called the Milky Way galaxy. Files on 478029B sat on the desk of senior protocol analyst Gex 9 Whiskers, a being whose 7 eyes had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, yet who currently found himself staring at this particular file with the kind of bewilderment usually reserved for quantum physics professors trying to explain why socks disappear in washing machines. The file was thick, disturbingly thick. Most species rated a standard 12-page assessment covering basic intelligence metrics, technological advancement, and social structures. Earth's file had ballooned to 12,047 pages and counting, which might have been a record if record-keeping weren't such a bureaucratic nightmare across multiple dimensions. Primitive bipeds with questionable hygiene standards, read the classification header, though someone had crossed out primitive and written confusingly advanced in the margin, only to have that crossed out and replaced with definitely primitive, which itself bore the notation but they launched things into space in what appeared to be the frustrated scrawl of multiple different appendages. The humans, as they called themselves with typical unimaginative directness, had been under observation for approximately 63 local years. The IFCPD maintained a rotating observation station just outside the system's heliopause, carefully cloaked and staffed by beings who had drawn the short straw in the assignment lottery. The position had become something of a punishment detail, not because of any inherent danger, but because observing humans was widely considered a career-limiting exercise in professional frustration. Consider the evidence. These creatures had developed nuclear weapons before they figured out how to efficiently distribute food to their entire population. They had created global communication networks that they primarily used to share pictures of small mammals and argue about topics that most galactic civilizations had resolved millennia ago. They had split their planet into arbitrary territorial divisions, and spent considerable resources defending invisible lines that existed primarily in their collective imagination. Yet somehow, inexplicably, they had also produced art that moved beings across the galaxy to tears, music that transcended species barriers, and literature that had been translated into languages that didn't even use sound as a primary communication method. They had developed medical techniques that rivaled some of the more advanced civilizations, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that bordered on the miraculous, when properly motivated, and showed a disturbing tendency to survive situations that should have eliminated them from the galactic gene pool entirely. The current observation team leader, a methodical creature called Plex 14 Tendrils, had submitted 17 separate requests for transfer off the Earth detail. Each request had been denied with the same form letter. Assignment continues until comprehensive cultural assessment is completed. Plex had begun to suspect that comprehensive cultural assessment was bureaucratic code for until you figure out what in the blazing nebulas is wrong with these creatures. The latest addition to the file came from the Psychological Assessment Division. Humans demonstrate advanced technological capability alongside primitive territorial behavior. They cooperate on projects spanning their entire planet, while simultaneously engaging in resource conflicts over geographical regions smaller than most spaceship landing zones. They appear to possess both collective intelligence and individual stupidity in measures that defy standard psychological models. Recommend extended observation period. Extended observation period. Plex's tendrils twitched with irritation as he reviewed the directive. They had been observing for over 6 decades, and the humans seemed to become more contradictory with each passing year. Just when the observation team thought they had identified behavioral patterns, the humans would do something completely unexpected, like launching vehicles toward other planets while arguing about whether their own planet was spherical. The IFCPD's mandate was clear: establish peaceful contact with developing civilizations, guide them toward galactic community membership, and file the appropriate paperwork in triplicate. Simple, straightforward, and absolutely impossible when dealing with beings who couldn't agree on basic reality among themselves, which brought Plex to the current problem. The authorization for formal contact application, Form 2 Order Date 47C, which required a unanimous decision from the assessment board regarding the target species' readiness for galactic citizenship. The board had been debating Earth's case for 3 local years, and the proceedings had devolved into something resembling a philosophical discussion group with severe anger management issues. The debate centered on a fundamental question that had never before been relevant. What do you do with a species that simultaneously demonstrates both the intelligence required for galactic membership and the apparent inability to manage their own planetary resources without constant conflict? The guidelines were quite specific about minimum intelligence requirements, technological benchmarks, and social stability metrics. Earth met exactly none of the social stability requirements, while inexplicably exceeding several of the technological benchmarks and achieving intelligence scores that made some of the older galactic civilizations uncomfortable. Adding to the complexity was Earth's location. The planet sat at what would become a crucial junction point for 3 different trade routes once the planned galactic expansion reached this sector. Ignoring them wasn't really an option, but formal contact protocols had never been designed for species that might greet alien visitors by either worshipping them as gods or immediately attempting to dissect them for scientific research, depending on which day of their arbitrary weekly cycle first contact occurred. The solution, when it finally emerged from the bureaucratic maze, was so elegantly simple that it immediately raised suspicions about its workability. The assessment board had decided to implement Protocol 7B, gradual introduction through domestic interaction. The theory was sound: approach the humans in their natural habitat, observe their behavior patterns up close, and establish preliminary communication protocols without triggering the panic responses that seemed to characterize their reaction to most unexpected stimuli. The practical application involved what the humans would undoubtedly perceive as someone knocking on their doors. The observation team would deploy advanced camouflage technology, approach individual human dwellings, and initiate basic communication protocols through the simple expedient of requesting entry. The humans' responses would provide crucial data about their social structures, individual versus collective decision-making processes, and general receptiveness to unknown visitors. It was, the assessment board agreed, a foolproof plan. Plex 14 tendrils had been dealing with humans long enough to know that any plan described as foolproof, when dealing with this particular species, was almost certainly doomed to spectacular failure. But orders were orders, forms had been, and the bureaucratic machinery of first contact had begun its slow, inexorable grinding toward what promised to be either a breakthrough in interspecies relations, or a cautionary tale that would be referenced in IFCPD training manuals for the next millennium. The target location had been selected with careful consideration: a small suburban community in what the humans called North America, specifically chosen for its representative demographic profile and relative isolation from major population centers. Preliminary scans indicated approximately 28 in 47 individual dwelling units occupied by humans displaying standard behavioral patterns for their species. What could possibly go wrong? The answer to that rhetorical question arrived approximately 72 hours later, delivered in the form of Field Report, UN-1 from the Advanced Reconnaissance Team. Plex 14 tendrils read it twice, then summoned his assistant to verify that the translation software hadn't suffered a catastrophic malfunction. The initial approach proceeded according to protocol. The report began, which immediately raised suspicions, since nothing involving humans ever proceeded according to any protocol invented by rational beings. Agent Dex 7 Limbs deployed standard camouflage technology and approached the first designated dwelling at 0800 local time. Dwelling appeared to contain 3 humans, 2 adult specimens and 1 juvenile. The camouflage technology in question represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering. It bent light around the user, muffled sound waves, and even adjusted local electromagnetic signatures to render the wearer effectively invisible to any known detection method. It had been tested across 46 different worlds, and had never failed to provide perfect concealment. Humans, apparently, hadn't read the technical specifications. Upon activation of the dwelling's acoustic signaling device, the report continued with admirable bureaucratic precision. The juvenile specimen immediately announced, "Mom, there's someone at the door but I can't see them." The adult female specimen responded with what our linguistic databases classify as concerned profanity, and activated a visual monitoring device. Plex paused his reading to massage what passed for his temple. The humans had developed security cameras, which was reasonable enough for a species obsessed with territorial boundaries. What wasn't reasonable was their apparent ability to detect invisible beings, through technology that shouldn't have been capable of such detection. The report continued. Agent Dex 7 Limbs attempted to maintain protocol by repeating the acoustic signal. The adult female specimen observed the visual monitoring device for 4.3 minutes, during which she was heard to mutter phrases our translators render as "I swear, there's someone there, and why can't I see them on the camera?" She then activated the dwelling's barrier and shouted through it, "I know you're out there, whoever you are. I've got a gun and I've called the police." The word gun had required 17 different footnotes in the translation, none of which made the situation sound any more encouraging. Humans had apparently developed projectile weapons as a solution to most social problems, which explained quite a lot about their civilization's ongoing difficulties with peaceful coexistence. Agent Dex 7 Limbs attempted to initiate communication protocols by responding with standard greeting pattern 7. "Greetings, inhabitant of this dwelling. I request permission to enter for purposes of peaceful communication." The female specimen's response was immediate and concerning. Plex skipped ahead to the audio transcript, which had been helpfully provided in both the original human language and its Galactic standard translation. The original consisted largely of words that had been flagged by the IFCPD's linguistic propriety filter. The translation was more diplomatic: "Go away or I will discharge kinetic projectiles in your general direction," followed by summoning local enforcement authorities. The second attempted contact had gone slightly better, if you defined better, as didn't result in threats of physical violence. The target dwelling housed an elderly human female, who had apparently mistaken the invisible alien visitor for what the report described as a solicitor for religious conversion or commercial product. The subject repeatedly stated, "Not interested, go away," despite Agent Dex 7 Limbs' attempts to explain the peaceful nature of the contact attempt. When the agent persisted, the subject activated a water distribution system, apparently designed for garden maintenance, and directed it toward the door. Agent Dex 7 Limbs was forced to retreat when the camouflage system began experiencing moisture-related malfunction. The third contact attempt had introduced an entirely new category of human behavior that wasn't covered in any of the IFCPD's cultural preparation materials. The dwelling contained what the report clinically described as one adolescent human exhibiting behavioral patterns consistent with social isolation and excessive technological engagement. Upon hearing the acoustic signal, the subject immediately announced, "Oh, it's probably just those kids doing the stupid door-knocking prank again." The subject then activated what appeared to be a recording device, and began speaking to it. "Day 12 of the invisible door-knocker mystery, and they're back. I've got motion sensors, thermal cameras, and electromagnetic field detectors set up. Whatever's doing this isn't showing up on any normal sensors, but the door is definitely being knocked on." Plex felt a peculiar sensation that his species' medical texts described as impending systemic failure due to excessive stress. The humans weren't just detecting their invisible visitors, they were treating it as some sort of entertainment and documenting the experience for unknown purposes. The situation had deteriorated rapidly from there. Word of the mysterious knocking had apparently spread through the human settlement's communication networks with the efficiency of a plague organism. By the end of the first day, 17 different dwellings had reported invisible visitors, and the local human authorities had received 43 separate communications about suspicious activity. The humans' response to this perceived threat displayed their species' characteristic blend of paranoia and ingenuity. They had organized what they called neighborhood watch groups, which seemed to involve clusters of humans standing around in the dark with portable illumination devices, waiting for something they couldn't see to arrive at locations they couldn't predict.
More troubling was their apparent ability to develop countermeasures on the fly. One human had deployed what the report described as a grid of fine powder across the approach to their dwelling. When Agent Yek's 5 eyes had attempted contact, the powder had revealed clear footprint patterns, causing the human to begin shouting about invisible intruders and government experiments. Another human had rigged some sort of primitive alarm system, using string and metallic objects that created audible signals when disturbed. The noise had attracted every human within a considerable radius, resulting in what the report tactfully described as a significant gathering of agitated locals, discussing the situation in increasingly animated terms. But perhaps the most concerning development was the humans' tendency to theorize about the cause of their mysterious visitors. The IFCPD's communication intercepts had recorded conversations involving explanations ranging from government mind control experiments to interdimensional beings to elaborate practical jokes by technologically advanced neighbors. One human had come uncomfortably close to the truth by suggesting cloaked aliens conducting reconnaissance, though he had immediately undermined his credibility by adding, probably working with the lizard people who run the bank. The field report concluded with a recommendation that made Plex's tendrils twitch with apprehension, suggest immediate revision of Contact Act protocols. Current approach appears to be generating increased human awareness and organized resistance. Species demonstrates unexpected sensory capabilities and rapid adaptive response to unknown stimuli. Request guidance on proceeding with mission objectives. Plex stared at the report, then at the growing pile of similar reports from the other contact team. In less than 72 hours, their foolproof plan had managed to turn a quiet human settlement into what appeared to be a conspiracy theorist's paradise and a training ground for anti-alien resistance tactics. The humans still hadn't actually seen their visitors, but they were definitely knocking back.
By day 7 of what the IFCPD had optimistically designated Operation Friendly Neighbor, the situation had evolved beyond the scope of any existing first contact protocol and into what could only be described as an interdimensional comedy of errors, with potentially galactic consequences. The local human communication networks had exploded with activity. Something called social media had transformed the mysterious knocking phenomenon into what appeared to be a form of mass entertainment. Humans from across their planet were now offering advice, theories, and increasingly sophisticated detection methods to the residents of what they had dubbed Knockerville. Plex 14 tendrils reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing alarm. The humans had established a website called catchtheknockers.com that featured live video feeds from 17 different dwellings, real-time sensor data, and a comments section that had attracted 2.3 million participants in less than a week. The commentary ranged from helpful suggestions like try thermal imaging to elaborate conspiracy theories involving government cover-ups and time travelers. More concerning was the humans' apparent ability to crowdsource solutions to problems they didn't fully understand. A human identified as Tech Wizard 47 had posted detailed schematics for what they called multi-spectrum detection arrays, which combined traditional cameras with infrared sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, and something ominously labeled quantum fluctuation monitors. The fact that the quantum fluctuation monitors were built from components available at what humans called hardware stores suggested either remarkable resourcefulness or complete ignorance of the physical laws they were attempting to manipulate. Unfortunately, it was turning out to be the former. Agent Glick's 3 appendages had learned this the hard way when approaching a dwelling that had been retrofitted with what appeared to be every detection device mentioned in the website's comments section. The moment Glicks had stepped onto the property, 17 different alarms had activated. 3 different camera systems had begun tracking his movement through methods that shouldn't have worked, and a human voice had announced through speakers, "Gotcha, I can't see you, but I know exactly where you are." The human had then done something that violated several fundamental assumptions about primitive species. He had opened his door and begun speaking directly to the invisible visitor with casual confidence. "Look, I don't know what you are, or where you're from, but this sneaking around thing isn't working for anyone. My neighbors are getting paranoid, my wife thinks I'm losing my mind, and frankly, your stealth technology has some serious flaws if a guy with a Radio Shack budget can track you. How about we just talk?" Agent Glicks had been so surprised by this direct approach that he had actually responded, forgetting 17 different protocol violations in the process. The conversation that followed had been recorded by the human's equipment and was now being analyzed by xenolinguistics experts across 3 different galaxies. The human, who identified himself as Dave from accounting, had demonstrated the species' characteristic tendency to adapt rapidly to unprecedented situations. Within 10 minutes, he had deduced that his invisible visitor was likely non-human, possibly extraterrestrial, and definitely more technologically advanced than anything terrestrial. His response to this revelation had been to offer coffee and ask if aliens paid tax. The situation had escalated further when Dave had begun posting updates about his alien contact on the same website that was tracking the mysterious knockings. Within hours, his house had been surrounded by what appeared to be every human within a 100-mile radius who owned a camera, detection equipment, or an opinion about extraterrestrial life. The gathering had included representatives from what humans called the media, which seemed to be a species-wide information distribution system operated by individuals with remarkable persistence and an apparent immunity to the concept of personal privacy. They had set up what they called a news permitter and begun broadcasting continuous updates about the first contact event in suburbia. The IFCPD observation post had been forced to implement emergency protocols when human aircraft began circling the area. The humans had somehow convinced their primitive flying machines to carry increasingly sophisticated sensor equipment, and at least 3 different aircraft were broadcasting live video feeds to their global information network. Agent Plex received hourly updates that read like reports from a war zone, if war zones typically involved beings arguing about proper interview techniques for invisible aliens, and whether first contact protocols required background check. The breaking point had come when one particularly enterprising human had realized that the invisible visitors were consistently targeting doors. This human, identified as Professor Anderson and apparently possessing credentials in something called theoretical physics, had published a paper titled Practical Applications of Quantum Mechanics in Alien Detection, in which he had correctly hypothesized that the visitors were using advanced camouflage technology that could be defeated by indirect observation methods. Within 12 hours, 17 different humans had successfully mapped the movements of invisible aliens, using techniques that included motion-activated glitter bombs, carefully placed reflective surfaces, and something called the flower trick, that involved coating entire yards with fine powder. The aliens were now effectively visible to human detection methods, while remaining completely invisible to human eyes, a paradox that was causing existential crises among IFCPD philosophers and practical headaches among field operatives. The final straw had been the humans' decision to begin communicating back. Not content with simply detecting their invisible visitors, they had started leaving what they called welcome packages at their door. These packages contained items that suggested either remarkable insight into alien psychology or complete insanity: bottled water, protein bars, universal mathematical symbols, pictures of Earth's diverse ecosystem, and handwritten notes that ranged from "Welcome to Earth" to "Please don't probe us." One human had left a package containing a smartphone with a note reading, "I figured you guys might want to learn about our culture. I've loaded this with Wikipedia, Netflix and YouTube. Sorry about the YouTube comments section in advance." Agent Yek's 5 eyes had made the mistake of actually examining the device, which had immediately connected to Earth's information networks, and begun downloading what appeared to be the entire documented history of human civilization, including 17 different versions of the same event, contradictory scientific theories, and approximately 40,000 hours of humans recording themselves doing inexplicable things for the entertainment of other humans. The Cultural Analysis Department was still processing the implications of something called cat videos. Meanwhile, the humans had organized themselves with frightening efficiency. They had established communication protocols, assigned roles based on individual expertise, and created what they called shift schedules to maintain 24-hour observation of potential contacts. They had also begun reaching out to human authorities, scientific institutions, and what appeared to be every person on their planet with an interest in extraterrestrial life. The most troubling development was their apparent assumption that the invisible visitors were benevolent. Rather than responding with fear or aggression, the majority of humans seemed to regard the situation as an opportunity for peaceful contact with alien life. They had prepared gifts, written welcoming messages in multiple human languages, and begun discussing the philosophical implications of interstellar communication, which meant that Plex 14 Tendrils was faced with a situation that existed nowhere in IFCPD guidelines. A species that was actively trying to make first contact with aliens, who were trying to make first contact with them, while neither side could actually see each other, but both sides knew the other was there. The humans had turned their invisible alien visitors into a global phenomenon, a scientific challenge, and a diplomatic opportunity, all while maintaining a sense of humor about the absurdity of the situation. They were, Plex realized with growing horror, actually winning. The end of Operation Friendly Neighbor arrived, not with the dignified conclusion of a successful first contact protocol, but with what the IFCPD's official report would diplomatically describe as an unplanned transparency event precipitated by equipment malfunction in human ingenuity. It began when a 10-year-old human named Tommy discovered that his grandmother's antique television set, when tuned to a specific frequency and positioned at exactly the right angle, could somehow display the outline of invisible aliens. The technical explanation involved electromagnetic interference, quantum field fluctuations, and what IFCPD engineers would later admit was a critical oversight in camouflage technology calibration. The practical explanation was that humans had once again demonstrated their species' supernatural ability to break advanced technology through pure accident. Tommy's discovery, naturally, was live-streamed to the entire planet. Within 3 hours, 17 million humans had watched a fuzzy, black and white image of Agent Deck's 7 limbs, standing awkwardly on someone's front porch, clearly visible on a television that was older than most galactic civilizations. The image quality was terrible, the viewing angle was limited, and the audio was non-existent, but it was undeniably footage of an invisible alien looking confused and slightly embarrassed. The human response was immediate, overwhelming, and completely contrary to every xenological prediction about primitive species encountering superior technology. Instead of panic, religious hysteria, or aggressive territorial behavior, the humans reacted with what could only be described as collective excitement, mixed with sheepish apology. The first official human communication came from Dave from accounting, who had somehow become the informal spokesperson for human-alien relations. Standing in his yard, surrounded by detection equipment and addressing a news camera while speaking to an invisible alien, he delivered what would become the most watched diplomatic address in galactic history. "Okay, so we can see you now, sort of, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we're really sorry about the whole flower bombing thing. We know you were trying to be polite with the door knocking, and we appreciate that, but you have to understand that mysterious invisible visitors are kind of a big deal for us. We've been wondering if we're alone in the universe for basically our entire history, so when you showed up, we got a little excited. Also, your stealth technology is actually pretty impressive, but you might want to recalibrate it for electromagnetic interference from pre-digital television set." Agent Deck's 7 limbs, who had been standing motionless for 17 minutes, trying to decide if responding would constitute a protocol violation, finally abandoned all pretense of following IFCPD guidelines and spoke directly to the assembled crowd of humans. "We were attempting to establish peaceful contact through non-threatening domestic approach protocols." The humans' reaction was immediate applause, which apparently was their species' way of expressing approval and welcome. Someone in the crowd shouted, "We know, we figured that out. We've been trying to help." What followed was the most informal first contact in galactic history. The humans had prepared presentation materials, including charts explaining their planetary governmental systems, samples of their cultural achievements, and what they called care packages containing local food, entertainment media, and instruction manuals for human social interaction. They had also prepared questions, hundreds of them, ranging from "What's your planet like?" to "Do you need any help with your stealth technology?" to "Would you like to try pizza?" The IFCPD observation team found themselves in the unprecedented position of conducting first contact protocols, while surrounded by helpful humans, offering technical advice, cultural exchange opportunities, and sandwich. The humans had somehow transformed a carefully planned military-style operation into what they called a neighborhood welcome party. Agent Plex 14 Tendrils received his final field report
while watching live coverage of humans teaching aliens to play something called cornhole, while discussing interstellar trade agreement. The report was mercifully brief. Mission parameters have been exceeded in ways not covered by existing protocols. Humans have successfully established first contact with us. Recommend immediate diplomatic recognition and formal cultural exchange program. Also recommend updating stealth technology specifications to account for primitive electromagnetic interference. PS Pizza is actually quite good. The bureaucratic aftermath took approximately 6 months to resolve, during which time the humans had established formal diplomatic relations with 17 different galactic species, launched their first interstellar communication satellite, and somehow convinced the crystalline hive minds of Andromeda Sector 12 to participate in something called a cultural festival. The final report on Operation Friendly Neighbor filled 47,000 pages and included appendices covering topics ranging from human adaptation capabilities under unprecedented circumstances to the strategic applications of baked goods in interstellar diplomacy. The conclusion was elegantly simple. Humans were ready for galactic citizenship, not because they met the standard requirements, but because they had demonstrated the ability to exceed those requirements while maintaining their fundamental humanity. The Intergalactic First Contact Protocol Division officially redesignated Earth as File Gen 1A, species demonstrating exceptional diplomatic potential through unconventional methods. They also established the first IFC-PD training facility on a planet inhabited by the species being studied, where alien diplomats learned advanced first contact techniques from humans who had never actually seen their first alien visitors, but had somehow figured out how to make friends with them anyway. Plex 14 Tendrils was promoted to senior cultural liaison and assigned permanent residence on Earth, where he discovered that humans were just as confusing when you could see them as when you couldn't, but considerably more entertaining. He also learned to appreciate pizza, developed a fondness for something called reality television, and became the first alien to receive a human driver's license. Though the less said about that particular cultural exchange, the better. The universe, as it turned out, was full of species that could knock on doors. The humans were the first to figure out how to answer them properly, even when they couldn't see who was knocking back.